You have swept these halls for 20 years, and not one person has ever asked your name properly. They call you, "Hey, janitor." They call you the custodian. Once, a substitute teacher called you sir by mistake, and you smiled for the rest of the day like she'd handed you a gift. Your name is Silas Kettering. You are 68 years old. You have a gray mustache. You trim every Sunday night in the mirror of a bathroom you painted yourself 11 years ago, off the clock, because the peeling paint embarrassed you more than it embarrassed anyone who actually used it. Riverbend High School has 1,140 students and 94 staff members, and you know every single one of their morning routines better than they know yours. You know which teacher forgets her coffee mug on Fridays. You know which kid eats lunch alone in the stairwell because the cafeteria is too loud for him. You know the janitor's closet by the gym floods every March, and you fix the pipe yourself 3 times because maintenance requests take 6 weeks, and that boy's asthma can't wait 6 weeks for dry floors. Nobody knows any of this about you. To them, you are a uniform. Navy blue name patch that says S. Kettering, a ring of keys that opens every door in the building except, it seems, any door into anyone's curiosity. You started here in 2006. Your hair was still dark then. Your wife, Atelier, was still alive then, and she used to pack your lunch in a tin box with a rooster on it, and she'd write little notes on napkins. You matter more than you know, Silas, and you kept every single one of those napkins in a shoebox at home. Because when she died 4 years later, those napkins were the last things she wrote to you in her own handwriting. You never told anyone that. Why would you? Nobody asked. The new principal, a sharp young woman named Fenwick Cross, took over 18 months ago. She has a leadership podcast and a laminated 5-year vision plan, and she refers to the custodial staff, when she refers to them at all, as facilities resources. Last spring, at an all-staff meeting, she introduced every single department head by name and thanked them individually for their contributions to the Riverbend family. When she got to introducing you and the 2 other custodians, she gestured vaguely toward the back of the auditorium and said, "And of course, thank you to our facilities team for keeping things running." She didn't know your name. 18 months and she didn't know your name. You clapped along with everyone else. You always do. You've learned that dignity, when nobody hands it to you, is something you have to carry yourself quietly, like a stone in your pocket that only you know is there. The humiliations are rarely loud. That's the cruelest part. Nobody screams at you. Nobody fires you in front of a crowd. It's smaller than that. And smaller things are harder to point to, harder to justify being hurt by. It's the way Mr. Denholm, the assistant superintendent, stepped over your mop bucket last October without breaking his phone call. Not even a glance down, as though you and the bucket were the same piece of furniture. It's the way parents at back-to-school night look through you like glass, glancing past your Navy uniform toward the teachers, the real staff, the people worth a smile. It's the way every June the yearbook comes out with photos of every teacher, every coach, every lunch lady even, but never you. 20 years, 20 yearbooks, and you have never once appeared in a single page of Riverbend High School history, despite having personally waxed the gym floor for 20 consecutive homecoming dances. Last month, during a budget review meeting you weren't invited to but overheard through a propped door, you heard Ms. Cross say, "Honestly, some of these veteran custodial salaries are hard to justify given what we could pay for newer hires." She didn't say your name. She didn't need to. There are only 3 of you on staff who've been here more than 15 years, and you are the oldest. You went home that night and sat at your kitchen table, the one Ottilie picked out at an estate sale in 1994, and you did something you hadn't done in years. You counted your savings, not because you were afraid of losing your job, though you were, but because for the first time in a long time, you let yourself wonder whether 20 years of showing up, of caring more than anyone asked you to, of being the invisible thread holding a building together, had amounted to anything at all in anyone else's eyes. Your daughter, Vesper, calls every Sunday from Ohio. She's 34, a nurse, and she worries about you living alone since her mother passed. "Dad, are people treating you okay there?" she asked last week, and you said what you always say. "Everyone's fine, sweetheart. Just fine." You didn't tell her about the meeting. You didn't tell her that just fine has become the softest lie you tell, week after week, because the truth felt too small and too sad to hand to someone you love. If you've ever felt invisible in a place you gave everything to, if you know what it's like to be The reason something runs smoothly while getting none of the credit. Now stay with this story, because it's about to change. And I think you'll want to see how. And if stories like this move you, hit subscribe, because there are so many more people like Silas whose quiet dignity deserves to be seen. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being essential and invisible at the same time. You feel it most at 6 a.m. When you unlock the building alone, footsteps echoing through empty hallways that won't fill with noise for another hour. You feel it at 5 p.m. when you're still there, waxing floors after everyone else has driven home to families who ask about their day. You feel it in the quiet certainty that if you disappeared tomorrow, most of Riverbend High School wouldn't know your first name well enough to write it on a card. The letter came on a Tuesday in early spring, tucked into your staff mailbox, between a benefits reminder and a flyer for the spring carnival. It was from the district office. Budget restructuring, it said. Effective the following semester, custodial staff hours would be reduced, and 2 positions, including, it specified, the longest tenured position in the department, would be transitioned to part-time status to better align with facility needs. They didn't call it what it was, but you knew. 20 years of full-time work. 20 years of health insurance that kept Ottilie's final months bearable. 20 years of showing up before the sun and leaving after it set. Reduced to a line item that no longer aligned. You stood in the mailroom holding that letter for a long time. Your hands, which have fixed 1,000 broken things in that building, shook holding a piece of paper. That was the moment you decided to retire. Not because they pushed you exactly, though they did in the softest, most bureaucratic way possible, but because you realized, standing there, that you had spent 20 years hoping someone would eventually see you, and nobody ever had, and you were tired of waiting for a recognition that clearly wasn't coming. You submitted your notice the next morning, effective the following Friday. No fanfare, no party. Ms. Cross signed the paperwork, without looking up from her laptop, and said, "We appreciate your service," the exact same phrase. You noted that was printed on the form itself. Your last day was quieter than you expected. A few kids you'd talked to over the years, the boy with asthma, now a junior, and a girl named Corliss who used to eat lunch in the stairwell, and now ran the debate club, stopped by to say goodbye. Corliss hugged you and cried a little, which surprised you both. "You always said good morning to me when nobody else did," she said, "every single day for 4 years. You didn't know that it mattered. You'd just been doing what felt like the smallest, most obvious kindness. It hadn't occurred to you that for some kid eating alone in a stairwell, good morning from the janitor might have been the only warm thing in her day. You cleaned out your office that afternoon. A converted supply closet near the boiler room. No window, a single bare bulb. A desk you'd rescued from a dumpster in 2009. 20 years of a life folded into 3 cardboard boxes. You worked slowly, not because there was much to pack, but because each object was a small ceremony you weren't ready to end. You didn't know that Fenwick Cross herself would walk into that office the following Monday, planning to have it cleared out and converted into additional storage. You didn't know that when she opened the bottom drawer of your desk, expecting to find nothing but grime and forgotten tools. She would instead find the truth of who you actually were. Fenwick Cross had never once in 18 months wondered what was behind the quiet man in the Navy uniform. That Monday, clipboard in hand, she opened your desk expecting an inventory task. What she found instead stopped her cold. The bottom drawer was full of folders, neatly labeled in careful handwriting. Not custodial supply logs. Financial records. 20 years of them. She pulled out the first folder. It was labeled Riverbend Opportunity Fund, founded 2007. Inside were bank statements, scholarship disbursement records, and a stack of thank you letters, dozens of them, from students going back nearly 2 decades. She recognized some of the names. Students who'd gone on to college, to trade school, to nursing programs and engineering degrees, all of them thanking an anonymous donor whose gift had changed the direction of their lives. She kept reading. The fund had been quietly seeded year after year by a portion of a single custodian's paycheck, a portion so consistent, so disciplined that over 2 decades it had grown, with modest interest, into something the school board itself had unknowingly celebrated for years without ever learning who was behind it. The Riverbend Opportunity Fund wasn't corporate. It wasn't a mystery benefactor from downtown. It was you, every semester. Every scholarship check the district proudly announced at graduation. tracing back to a man in a Navy uniform nobody had bothered to learn the name of. There was more. A folder of certificates, an engineering degree from a state university, earned at night over 6 years while you worked days, completed the same year Ottilie first got sick. A folder of patent filings, 2 of them, for a water conservation valve design you'd never had the capital or connections to manufacture, but had designed anyway in your spare hours, because your mind simply worked that way. A job offer, decades old, from a firm in Chicago, folded and refolded so many times the creases had gone soft. An offer you'd turned down to stay near. Ottilie's family, to build a smaller, quieter life instead of a bigger one. And beneath all of it, at the very bottom of the drawer, a single shoebox. Fenwick opened it and found napkins. Dozens of them, worn thin, ink-faded, each one carrying a few handwritten words. "You matter more than you know, Silas." She sat down on the edge of your old desk, in the windowless office she'd walked past 1,000 times, without a second thought. And for the first time in 18 months as principal of Riverbend High School, she cried. By Wednesday, the story had moved through the building like a current. A teacher who'd received a Riverbend opportunity, fund letter for her own daughter, years earlier, without ever knowing the source, put it together first. Then Corliss, now a senior, connected the dots from something you'd once said, offhand about believing in kids, nobody else. Notices. Then it reached the school board, who pulled 20 years of scholarship records and confirmed what Fenwick Cross already knew in her chest before. She saw the paperwork prove it. Fenwick called you herself that Wednesday evening. Her voice was different than you'd ever heard it. Smaller, unsteadier, stripped of the polish she wore like armor at staff meetings. "Mr. Kettering," she said, and something in you settled just slightly, hearing your name spoken like it meant something. "I found your drawer. I need you to come back to the school. Not to work. Just please come back." You almost said no. 20 years of being overlooked had taught you not to expect much from a phone call. But something in her voice, the crack in it, made you put on your coat. When you walked back into Riverbend High School that Friday evening, 1 week to the day since your last shift, the gymnasium lights were on and it was not empty. Nearly 300 people stood inside. Former students, some of them with children of their own now, some in scrubs straight from hospital shifts, some in suits, some still teenagers. Corliss stood near the front, holding a small handmade banner. Teachers who'd never once learned your first name stood shoulder to shoulder with the boy with asthma, now grown, now paramedic, standing near the door in his uniform. Fenwick Cross stood at the podium, and when she saw you in the doorway, she stopped mid-sentence and simply said, "There he is." The room turned. 300 faces all looking directly at you, for what felt like the first time in 20 years. One by one they came forward. A young woman named Isadora, who'd been the first Riverbend graduate to attend medical school, told the room that the scholarship she'd received had let her stay in school instead of dropping out to support her siblings, and that she'd spent 8 years wondering who to thank. A man named Osric, now an engineer himself, held up a folder of his own patent work and said the fund had covered his tuition the semester his father lost his job. Corliss read the good morning story to the whole gymnasium, and half the room was crying by the time she finished. Fenwick Cross spoke last. She didn't hide behind her usual polish. She looked directly at you and said, simply that she had walked past you in these halls for a year and a half without ever asking who you were, and that she would spend the rest of her career making sure no one at Riverbend High School was ever invisible again, starting with renaming the fund, effective immediately, the Silas Kettering Opportunity Fund, with a plaque to be mounted outside the very office that had once been a windowless supply closet, with your name on nothing at all. You stood there in your good coat, the same one you wore to Ottilie's funeral, and you did not know where to look, because for 20 years you had trained yourself not to expect anyone to look back. You go home that night to the quiet house you and Ottilie built a life in, and you sit at the kitchen table, and for the first time in a long while, the silence doesn't feel like loneliness. It feels like rest. You take out the shoebox of napkins, the real one, not the one now sitting laminated behind a glass case at the school board office, and you read a few of them again. Slowly, the way you always do. You matter more than you know, Silas. You believe it now, maybe for the first time in 20 years. Not because a room full of people finally saw you, but because you understand something you'd forgotten. The mattering was never something they had to give you. It was something you'd been building quietly, faithfully, in the dark, the entire time. You don't need the whole room to see you. You only need to know, in the quiet, that what you built in the dark was never small.